Chapter 16. Analysis. A feeling of immense, extraordinary relief took possession of him. Something was over, was settled. An awful weight of depression had vanished and was dissipated forever. So it seemed to him. It had lasted for 5 weeks. He raised his hand, looked at the towel soaked with blood, and muttered to himself, "Yes, now everything is absolutely at an end." And all that morning, for the first time in 3 weeks, he scarcely thought of Lisa, as though that blood from his cut fingers could settle his account even with that misery. He recognized clearly that he had escaped a terrible danger. "These people," he thought, "just these people who don't know a minute beforehand whether they'll murder a man or not. As soon as they take a knife in their trembling hands and feel the hot spurt of blood on their fingers, don't stick at cutting your throat, but cut off your head, clean off, as convicts express it. That is so." He could not remain at home and went out into the street, feeling convinced that he must do something, or something would happen to him at once. He walked about the streets and waited. He had an intense longing to meet someone, to talk to someone, even to a stranger, and it was only that which led him at last to think of a doctor and of the necessity of binding up his hand properly. The doctor, an old acquaintance of his, examined the wound and inquired with interest how it could have happened. Velchaninoff laughed and was on the point of telling him all about it, but restrained himself. The doctor was obliged to feel his pulse, and, hearing of his attack the night before, persuaded him to take some soothing medicine he had at hand. He was reassuring about the cuts. "They could have no particularly disagreeable results." Velchaninoff laughed and began to assure him that they had already had the most agreeable results. An almost irresistible desire to tell the whole story came over him twice again during that day. On one occasion to a total stranger with whom he entered into conversation at a tea shop. He had never been able to endure entering into conversation with strangers in public places before. He went into a shop to buy a newspaper. He went to his tailor's and ordered a suit. The idea of visiting the Pogoyeltsas was still distasteful to him, and he did not think of them, and indeed he could not have gone to their villa. He kept expecting something here in the town. He dined with enjoyment. He talked to the waiter and to his fellow diners, and drank half a bottle of wine. The possibility of the return of his illness of the day before did not occur to him. He was convinced that the illness had passed off completely at the moment when, after falling asleep so exhausted, he had, an hour and a half later, sprung out of bed and thrown his assailant on the floor with such strength. Towards evening he began to feel giddy, and at moments was overcome by something like the delirium he had had in his sleep. It was dusk when he returned home, and he was almost afraid of his room when he went into it. It seemed dreadful and uncanny in his flat. He walked up and down it several times, and even went into his kitchen where he had scarcely ever been before. "Here they were heating plates yesterday," he thought. He locked the door securely and lighted the candles earlier than usual. As he locked the door, he remembered, half an hour before, passing the porter's lodge, He had called Mavra and asked her whether Pavel Pavlovich had come in his absence, as though he could possibly have come. After locking himself in carefully, he opened the bureau, took out the razor case and opened the razor to look at it again. On the white bone handle there were still faint traces of blood. He put the razor back in the case and locked it up in the bureau again. He felt sleepy. He felt that he must go to bed at once, or he would not be fit for tomorrow. He pictured the next day for some reason as a momentous and decisive day. But the same thoughts that had haunted him all day in the street kept incessantly and persistently crowding and jostling in his sick brain. And he kept thinking, and for a long time could not get to sleep. "If it is settled that he tried to murder me accidentally," he went on pondering, "had the idea ever entered his head before, if only as a dream in a vindictive moment?" He decided that question strangely. That Pavel Pavlovich did want to kill him, but the thought of the murder had never entered his head. In short, Pavel Pavlovich wanted to kill him, but didn't know he wanted to kill him. "It's senseless, but that's the truth," thought Velchaninov. "It was not to get a post, and it was not on Bagautov's account he came here, though he did try to get a post here, and did run to see Bagautov, and was furious when he died. He thought no more of him than a chip. He came here on my account, and he came here with Lisa. And did I expect that he would murder me?" He decided that he did, that he had expected it from the moment when he saw him in the carriage following Bagautov's funeral. "I began, as it were, to expect something. But of course not that. But of course not that he would murder me. And can it be that all that was true?" he exclaimed again, suddenly raising his head from the pillow and opening his eyes. "All that madman told me yesterday about his love for me, when his chin quivered and he thumped himself on the breast with his fist? It was the absolute truth," he decided, still pondering and analyzing. "That Quasimodo from T was quite sufficiently stupid and noble to fall in love with the lover of his wife, about whom he noticed nothing suspicious in 20 years. He had been thinking of me with respect, cherishing my memory and brooding over my utterances for 9 years. Good heavens, and I had no notion of it! He could not have been lying yesterday. But did he love me yesterday when he declared his feeling and said, 'Let us settle our account'? Yes, it was from hatred that he loved me. That's the strongest of all loves. Of course it may have happened, of course it must have happened that I made a tremendous impression on him at tea. Tremendous and gratifying is just what it was, and it's just with a schiller like that, in the outer form of a Quasimodo, that such a thing could happen. He magnified me 100-fold because I impressed him too much in his philosophic solitude. It would be interesting to know by what I impressed him. Perhaps by my clean gloves and my knowing how to put them on. Quasimodos are fond of all that is aesthetic. Oh, aren't they fond of it? A glove is often quite enough for a noble heart, and especially one of these eternal husbands. The rest they supply themselves 1,000 times, and are ready to fight for you, to satisfy your slightest wish. What an opinion he had of my powers of fascination! Perhaps it was just my powers of fascination that made the most impression on him. And his cry, then, "If that one too, whom can one trust?" After that cry one may well become a wild beast. He comes here to embrace me and weep, as he expressed it in the most abject way. That is, he came here to murder me, and thought he came to embrace me and to weep. He brought Lisa too. But who knows? If I had wept with him, perhaps really he would have forgiven me, for he had a terrible longing to forgive me. At the first shock, all that was changed into drunken antics and caricature, and into loathsome womanish whining over his wrongs. Those horns he made on his forehead. He came drunk on purpose to speak out, though he was playing the fool. If he had not been drunk, even he could not have done it. And how he liked playing the fool, didn't he like it? Oh, wasn't he pleased, too, when he made me kiss him? Only he didn't know then whether he would end by embracing me or murdering me. Of course, it's turned out that the best thing was to do both. A most natural solution. Yes, indeed, nature dislikes monstrosities and destroys them with natural solutions. The most monstrous monster is the monster with noble feelings. I know that by personal experience, Pavel Pavlovich. Nature is not a tender mother, but a stepmother to the monster. Nature gives birth to the deformed. But instead of pitying him, she punishes him, and with good reason. Even decent people have to pay for embraces and tears of forgiveness nowadays, to say nothing of men like you and me, Pavel Pavlovich. Yes, he was stupid enough to take me to see his future bride. Good heavens, his future bride! Only a Quasimodo like that could have conceived the notion of rising again to a new life by means of the innocence of Mademoiselle Zalabinin. But it was not your fault, Pavel Pavlovich. It was not your fault. You're a monster, so everything about you is bound to be monstrous. Your dreams and your hopes. But though he was a monster, he had doubts of his dream. And that was why he needed the high sanction of Velchaninov, whom he so revered. He wanted Velchaninov to approve. He wanted him to reassure him that the dream was not a dream, but something real. He took me there from a devout respect for me and faith in the nobility of my feelings, believing, perhaps, that there, under a bush, we should embrace and shed tears near all that youthful innocence. Yes, that eternal husband was obliged, sooner or later, to punish himself for everything, and to punish himself he snatched up the razor. By accident, it is true, still he did snatch it up. And yet he stuck him with the knife, and yet he ended by stabbing him in the presence of the governor. And, by the way, had he any idea of that sort in his mind when he told me that anecdote about the best man? And was there really anything that night when he got out of bed and stood in the middle of the room? No, he stood there then as a joke. He got up for other reasons, and when he saw that I was frightened of him, he did not answer me for 10 minutes, because he was very much pleased that I was frightened of him. It was at that moment, perhaps, when he stood there in the dark, that some idea of this sort first dawned upon him. Yet, if I had not forgotten that razor on the table yesterday, maybe nothing would have happened. Is that so? Is that so? To be sure, he had been avoiding me before. Why, he had not been to see me for a fortnight. He had been hiding from me to spare me. Of course he picked out Bagoutov first, not me. Why, he rushed to heat plates for me in the night, thinking to create a diversion. From the knife to pity and tenderness. He wanted to save himself and me, too, with his hot plates. And for a long time the sick brain of this man of the world went on working in this way, going round and round in a circle, till he grew calmer. He woke up next morning with the same headache, but with a quite new and quite unexpected terror in his heart. This new terror came from the positive conviction, which suddenly grew strong within him, that he, Velcheninov, a man of the world, would end it all that day by going of his own free will to Pavel Pavlovich. Why? What for? He had no idea, and with repugnance refused to know. All that he knew was that for some reason he would go to him. This madness, however, he could give it no other name, did, as it developed, take a rational form and fasten upon a fairly legitimate pretext. He had even, the day before, been haunted by the idea that Pavel Pavlovich would go back to his lodging and hang himself, like the clerk about whom Marya Sisowevna had told him. This notion of the day before had passed by degrees into an unreasoning but persistent conviction. Why should the fool hang himself? He kept protesting to himself every half-minute. He remembered Liza's words. Yet in his place perhaps I should hang myself, he reflected once. It ended by his turning towards Pavel Pavlovich instead of going to dinner. I shall simply inquire of Marya Sisowevna, he decided. But before he had come out into the street, he stopped short in the gateway. Can it be? Can it be? He cried, turning crimson with shame. Can it be that I'm crawling there to embrace and shed tears? That senseless abjectness was all that was needed to complete the ignominy. But from that senseless abjectness he was saved by the providence that watches over all decent and well-bred people. He had no sooner stepped into the street when he stumbled upon Alexander Lobov. The young man was in breathless haste and excitement. I was coming to see you. What do you think of our friend Pavel Pavlovich now? He's hanged himself, Velcheninov muttered wildly. Who's hanged himself? What for? Cried Lobov with wide-open eyes. Never mind, I didn't mean anything. Go on. Phew, damn it all, what funny ideas you have, though. He's not hanged himself at all. Why should he hang himself? On the contrary, he's gone away. I've only just put him into the train and seen him off. Phew, how he drinks, I tell you. We drank 3 bottles, Predposelov with us. But how he drinks, how he drinks! He was singing songs in the train. He remembered you, blew kisses, sent you his greetings. But he is a scoundrel, don't you think so? The young man certainly was a little tipsy. His flushed face, his shining eyes and faltering tongue betrayed it unmistakably. Velcheninov laughed loudly. So, in the end, they finished up with Bruderschaft. They embraced and shed tears. Oh, you Schilleresque poets. Don't call me names, please. Do you know he's given it all up over there? He was there yesterday, and he's been there today. He sneaked horribly. They locked Nadia up. She's sitting in a room upstairs. There were tears and lamentations, but we stood firm. But how he does drink, I say, doesn't he drink? And I say, isn't he mauvais ton? At least not mauvais ton exactly, but what shall I call it? He kept talking of you, but there's no comparison between you. You're a gentleman anyway, and really did move in decent society at one time, and have only been forced to come down now through poverty or something. Goodness knows what, I couldn't quite understand him. Ah, so he spoke to you of me in those terms? He did. Don't be angry. To be a good citizen is better than being in aristocratic society. I say that because in Russia nowadays one doesn't know whom to respect. You'll agree that it's a serious malady of the age when people don't know whom to respect, isn't it? It is. What did he say? He? Who? Ah, to be sure. Why did he keep saying, Velchaninoff 50, but a rake? Why but a rake and not and a rake? He laughed and repeated it 1,000 times over. He got into the train, sang a song, and burst out crying. It was simply revolting, pitiful, in fact, from drunkenness. Oh, I don't like fools. He fell to throwing money to the beggars for the peace of the soul of Lizaveta. His wife is that? His daughter. What's the matter with your hand? I cut it. Never mind, it will get better. Damn him, you know, it's a good thing he's gone, but I bet anything that he'll get married directly he arrives. He will, won't he? Why, but you want to get married too, don't you? Me? That's a different matter. What a man you are, really. If you are 50, he must be 60. You must look at it logically, my dear sir. And you know I used long ago to be a pure Slavophil by conviction. But now we look for dawn from the west. But goodbye. I'm glad I met you without going in. I won't come in, don't ask me, I've no time to spare. And he was just running off. Oh, by the way, he cried, turning back. Why, he sent me to you with a letter. Here is the letter. Why didn't you come to see him off? Velchaninov returned home and opened the envelope addressed to him. There was not one line from Pavel Pavlovich in it, but there was a different letter. Velchaninov recognized the handwriting. It was an old letter, written on paper yellow with age, with ink that had changed color. It had been written to him 10 years before, 2 months after he had left T and returned to Petersburg. But the letter had never reached him. He had received a different one instead of it. This was clear from the contents of this old yellow letter. In this letter, Natalia Vasilievna took leave of him forever, and confessed that she loved someone else, just as in the letter he had actually received. But she also did not conceal from him that she was going to have a child. On the contrary, to comfort him, she held out hopes that she might find a possibility of handing over the future child to him, declared henceforth that they had other duties. In short, there was little logic, but the object was clear. that he should no longer trouble her with his love. She even sanctioned his coming to tea in a year's time to have a look at the child. God knows why she changed her mind and sent the other letter instead. Velchaninoff was pale as you read it, but he pictured to himself Pavel Pavlovich finding that letter and reading it for the first time, before the opened ebony box inlaid with mother-of-pearl which was an heirloom in the family. He, too, must have turned pale as a corpse, he thought, catching a glimpse of his own face in the looking-glass. He must have read it and closed his eyes, and opened them again, hoping that the letter would have changed into plain white paper. Most likely he had done that a second time and a third. Breaking in. The revelation of Natalia Vasilyevna's decade-old letter in the final stages of this chapter gives us a new perspective on the motives and behavior of Pavel Pavlovich throughout the entire novella. For at no point during his stay in Petersburg had the affair been a secret to the man. The letter makes little difference for how Velchaninoff would remember his former love affair per se. Even according to this more candid letter, that relationship had been interrupted by the artillery officer. It does, however, settle the last question surrounding past events. Lisa was, in fact, Velchaninoff's daughter, and not the officer's, as Pavel Pavlovich tauntingly claimed in Chapter 10. Velchaninoff's conversation with the young Mr. Lobov contains references to the intellectual climate of the times. Friedrich Schiller was a German romantic author promoting high ideals about the good and the beautiful, and would have been popular with the prior generation of Russian literati, but disdained by the youth of Lobov's own day. By the 1870s, the radicals would have been more attracted by a materialistic progressivism, something that was emerging from the West, and thus in opposition to the Slavophil emphasis on traditional Russian religiosity. When Velchaninoff refers to Pavel Pavlovich as a Quasimodo during his nocturnal analysis, he is of course referring to the hunchback from Victor Hugo's famous novel. We can learn a great deal from Velchaninoff's analysis as the deliverance of an intelligent and active mind. But it is also a fallible mind, and we have not yet had the final word on events. That will have to wait for our final chapter. End of comments.